Good evening. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Jamestown Public School Board to order. It is Monday, September 16th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. in the Thompson Community Room of the middle school. Please note that we had a board member orientation at 4:30 tonight in the district office conference room. I'd like to welcome all those in our audience tonight. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would any board member like to declare a conflict of interest for our agenda this evening? Any conflicts of interest? Any conflicts of interest? If not, moving on. School board norms. Jamie, would you be willing to read the norms?
Absolutely. The board developed norms are to share and respect opinions and speak with a united voice once a decision has been reached, execute all duties of the school board in compliance with North Dakota Century Code, properly prepare for meetings, commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high-quality governance for all stakeholders.
Thank you, Jamie. Moving on, we have nothing under public communications. Under the consent agenda, would any board member like something removed from the consent agenda? Anything removed? If not, is there a motion? Motion by Steve, second by Jamie. We have a motion, a second for approval of the consent agenda. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. We're going to move on to our regular agenda. Please note that we'll have our budget hearing at 6 p.m. So when we get to that time, we'll just pause the meeting at that moment and continue with the budget hearing and then resume the meeting when that is complete. Under our regular agenda, we have nothing under correspondence or recognition. For reports tonight, if our student council member shows up tonight, we will fit them into the agenda at a later time. Under Board Education D, number 1, political competency, North Dakota State Scholarship. Please come forward.
And if I can add, I shared this earlier as Ms. Gunberg gets up to present to you. If you'd want to open up the link for the state scholarship, I did walk through that earlier today. I added a couple of notes that you could follow along with the things that are listed in the state scholarship, what is required, and I mean that required by administrative code or federal or by law. JPS embedded, what I mean by that is it's embedded into an existing course. So simply being a part of the school, it's either part of the school day or part of a particular course. So just being in that course or say taking a class at the CTC, you would have already completed these. That's what I mean by embedded. JPS available, that is available as an option for you as a student. And then the other is student driven. So what of that is performance driven or a student decision. So you can follow along with that as Ms. Gunberg gives an overview of the scholarship.
All right. Yes, and Dr. Leck did an awesome job with his document of kind of laying everything out. So I'm Julie Skunberg. I'm one of the high school counselors. This year there are 4 of us, which is very exciting. But my caseload, I work with juniors and seniors, and I have the A through K part of the alphabet. But this North Dakota scholarship, so to this point, up until this year, there was a $6,000 North Dakota scholarship, but it was the North Dakota Academic or the North Dakota CTE scholarship, where there was set criteria that we would work kids through and then get them to qualify for the $6,000. And this is the first year, well, last year students could qualify this way as well, but it was the last year for the old scholarship last year. So we're kind of starting with this all new, getting kids to qualify this year as well. We do give all of the students this when we meet with them every year to register. Starting, in 9th grade, middle school does it as well, but it is a part of the yearly meeting that every student gets with their school counselor. And then in the high school, we're mandated, we meet with every senior to go through four-year plan, everything that they need to graduate, a career plan, whether it's to go to college, work, whatever that is. And this is a huge part of that. But our department takes this scholarship very seriously, and we have since it originated. Every year we range from 50 to 60 students on average that get this, which 60 students times 6,000 is $360,000. So to me, we're just very passionate about this, and it's something that's just an integral part of everything we do with every student that comes through Jamestown High School. So as you guys are looking at this, I guess I was thinking I would kind of take you through it, and I don't want to get too long-winded either, and if you have questions, please ask. One thing that Dr. Leck had pointed out was some of this stuff does pull in to the system through Power School, Are You Ready, things like that. Some of it is reports that we have to generate where we are putting the data in, and I know the state is working on that continually to continue to streamline it and make it an easier process. So this year, I feel like it will be kind of labor intensive a little bit because we don't want to miss anything either when we're combining what's pulled and not pulled and the reports we're generating. But on the top part, the essential skills area is something that every one of the kids has to, that's the essential part. And earn, a North Dakota high school diploma. Then the second part, 9-week career education, individual counseling. Every student at Jamestown High School gets that because we meet with every student one-on-one every year. 4-year rolling plan is something we do, and that starts down in the 8th grade. And every year that we meet with kids, that is revisited, okay? And that goes into college as well. So it's 4 years, and then, once we get them as a junior and senior, that's including their life after high school as well. Civics test, every graduate has that. And then with this part, a 3.0 or higher GPA. And then 4 or more of those indicators. So then this gets to where, if you guys were all seniors that we're meeting with, we keep a sheet like this for every student. And then we are essentially, what I'm doing with you right now, we do with every kid. And we verify, so the 25 hours of community service, that's something that we document with every kid, keeping track of where have you been, who is it with. So we document that, and then we record that in the Choice Ready report. The 95% attendance, that's pulled. And one thing I want to note on that, 95% attendance is like allowing a student to miss 8 or 9 a year. So if a family takes a family vacation, so hitting 95% attendance, you have to be there quite a bit. Career exploration, I will elaborate a little bit on that. Every student gets that box checked because of what we do in our area. And for careers, we use Are You Ready? They start that in the middle school, where the areas of Are You Ready are learning about yourself, where they do interest profilers, career cluster surveys, basic skills surveys, and then work values. There's an Explore Careers section where they can browse careers on their own. They can take more inventories in the Career Finder, and then once they are able to get some careers that they've matched with, they can then compare education needed, all those types of things. There is a Get a Job section where we work on resume builder, cover letters, job interviews, things like that. We do encourage, I'm Career and Tech certified too, so throughout that I have a program of work that I do with the state, and that's kind of mapping and trying to get every department in the school to also incorporate a career unit. And what we encourage them to do is pull in careers that are related to math or science or whatever. So that's being done. We do in our Career Center too, we have a lot of career speakers come in. We host them over lunch. We do before school, after school. The speakers that come in talk about careers. We have colleges come in. We have the military come in. And this year too, I want to add, in the Are You Ready is the Compass profile, and that's really a cool feature. In the past, we've done Are You Ready, and when they do interest profiles and things like that, their data is then matched with a database, which is information that's being pulled from a database. Now with the Compass, it is tied to employers in North Dakota. So it's just so cool. So I was so excited to kick that off this year. We're just finishing actually senior classrooms, but they input all of their courses for their 4-year plan. They put their hobbies, their work, all of that in there. And then they have the option of selecting, do you want to connect with employers? Or you don't have to, but if you select, if you're 18, you can say, yes, I want to. If you're under 18, you put in your parent email. But literally what happens is they then start getting notifications from employers regarding work experiences, co-op experiences, things that would relate. It's really cool. And, you know, Are You Ready? I think the kids have thought could get kind of monotonous over the years because we do it all the time. But it was really fun to be able to say, hey, this is now a live document. So that is exciting.
If I can add, Mrs. Skunberg, I just want to draw attention to, I color-coded these, and I think it paints a pretty good picture. If you look at districts across the state, it's pretty unusual to see so many things that are available, even in larger districts, that are either, I think the essential skills is kind of a good place to start. Number one, because you have to meet the essential skills before you can move on to the others. But notice the amount of areas that are either required or embedded already in just being a part of Jamestown Public Schools. You have a lot that you're going to achieve just by coming to school. And that is not typical in a lot of schools to have the 21st century skills. That's embedded into a course. In many districts that you go to, that's not a box that may be checked because, or even have an option to be checked because it's not embedded anywhere and it's not a separate course. So I think the capstone project is another one that as you go to other districts, as you go through this whole list, there's only one activity that isn't color-coded. That means that we don't offer it, and no school offers it in North Dakota, the International Baccalaureate, at least none that I'm aware of. Schools in North Dakota focus on dual credit or advanced placement more than IB. And so that we don't have an option for. Every other thing falls into one of those categories. Either it's required, it's embedded into a class already, it's made available to you. So everything, and I think essential skills is a neat one because if you look at how many of the activities are either required or embedded already, students have a big steps forward because of what our counselors, our administrators, and our teachers have already done to make sure that kids meet those essential skills so they can even move on to the next couple components to be eligible for the Choice Ready Scholarship or North Dakota Scholarship, sorry.
One other thing I wanted to note, I see at the end Dr. Leck had Jim Upgren's contact information, and last February at parent-teacher conferences, we had him come and speak to our parents just to kind of lay the groundwork for this as well, and he's going to be coming again in February. And, that will be something, the kids have seen this too, but we want to have more parent education too on what it is, but it is a very exciting part of our job. Then going down to, I'm sorry, and I could talk to you guys all night about this. You're like, on the bottom then, there's 3 parts. And for a kid to get the scholarship, they have to qualify in 2 out of those 3. And, I just feel like we'll be able to get a lot more kids qualified for this scholarship in the future too. Your post-secondary track, you've got the ACT of 24, which we had before, or the SAT. So that is required if you're going to qualify there. And then below, 2 or more of those. And a lot of our kids that are academic students qualify, or we can check off more than 2 of those, okay? So if you can check off 4 of those, then you can transfer some of them, like over here to the ASVAB part where there's lines, okay? So we make a goal to try to get as many as we can in there. And, all of those, a kid has an opportunity, like Dr. Lex said, to hit all of those. The workforce ready in the middle. The plan of study, that's similar to the old scholarship that we had. Those are any CTE classes that you can take, and they have to be specific, but like our 2-hour blocks at the Career and Tech Center, those are a plan of study. Or we can make a plan of study with a combination of computer classes and accounting. So that is all through Career and Tech certified classes, or 3 credits in the same foreign language. And then on this one, if students struggle with hitting the 24 on their ACT, we have the work keys, which our department can do right in our office too. And then you have more indicators below where we try to fit them into. And then the military ready, we give the ASVAB to the juniors and seniors. And if they're physically fit, and then pulling 2 indicators out of anywhere in the other 2 that haven't already been used to meet that category is how we kind of piece this all together. What other questions do you guys have for me? Yes?
Melissa?
I was just curious on the not being able to have any more than 9 absences. What do you do in the case of there's a student that maybe has a long-term illness or something like that? Are they able to somehow make that up so they can still qualify?
Yes, and I believe school activities and like doctor excused medical notes don't count against that. Yep.
And I think it's important to remember, too, you have a checklist of these, and you don't have to meet all of them, just some of them. If you weren't able to meet the attendance, there are others. And if, to my point earlier, 3 of those 4 and those 4 additional indicators, 3 of those you get just by being a part of Jamestown High School. You have to meet then one of the others. So a lot of options for students to meet at least the essential skills.
Any other questions? Jason?
Let's assume that we have a junior transfer into our district, start of their junior year. We have a plan to work with those students in terms of checking the boxes and then making sure they're taken care of?
Absolutely. This is a part of every student. We have seniors that come in after the start of the year, and our goal would be to get them this scholarship. Absolutely. Yep.
Any other questions? Aaron?
Just wondering what the participation rate has been in this, or success rate has been historically on these, the old program versus, transitioning to this.
Yes. I'm trying to think. Last year, I think we had 157 seniors, and we had 60 that qualified. So 60, I'm not very good at math, but close to, our goal is, we've hit 50 or 60 every year, which is pretty good.
Dr. Leck?
And our goal is obviously for more. I think that's a great number, but we're striving continually to move that needle and get even more. Some of the things that we believe are helpful to make that happen are the things I've already talked about, trying to embed more, providing more opportunities for our students. The communication that happens with the counselors is critical. And Ms. Skunberg also referenced the importance of the communication at home and how we can engage our parents to be aware of what's happening on these. To that point, we were actually one of the districts to work with a group that has created a dashboard, and we're getting to the point now where it's an exciting thing, where we're going to be able to provide a dashboard to our families and our students so they can pull real-time data from databases to show, okay, Landon Leck has met this indicator, that indicator, this one. So right now, you look like you're going to be post-secondary ready if you do this. You've already met your military ready. And so to help parents, that's the component that we talked about earlier. Having Jim come and talk about this to parents is awareness is one part of it, but also being able to progress monitor and track. So you can encourage your son or daughter who maybe says, you know what, I don't want to take the ASVAB. Okay, don't worry about it. Well, now you would have a very clear reason why you would want to make sure that your son or daughter takes the ASVAB, because it might mean the difference between a $6,000 scholarship or not. And so all of those components of how we can engage our parents and engage our students to track where they're at for the North Dakota State Scholarship is going to be, I think, the way that we move the bar to move from 50 and 60 to 70, 80, 90, 100 that are going to be eligible.
And it was so exciting this year because we've known this has been coming for a while, so the kids have been exposed to it. They weren't just hit with it this year, but having seniors come in when they were in August for their schedules and wanting to make sure and go through this, you know. So I think the state has done an awesome job of creating this visual because kids, I mean, it's, you know, the other one, it wasn't, this is really user-friendly and it's gives you a goal, and it's been really motivating for kids.
So, any other questions?
I was just going to make a point to that dashboard. That's actually scheduled for board education this year. So you're going to get a chance to see the demo of that. We wanted this conversation to happen first, but the board education on what that demo looks like from a parent's perspective and a student's perspective is upcoming.
Very good. Steve?
Is there one factor that sticks out that is a limiting factor on this that would like maybe get you to 80 or 90?
I guess possibly the 3.0 grade point average, you know, would limit some. The nice thing this scholarship did, because the old scholarship was 3.0, but you couldn't have a D on your transcript, they eliminated that for this one too, because I think sometimes that was, you know, a kid could have a bad class and then they were kind of kicked out. But, you know, I really think, you know, considering the CTE element of this and the work keys test, which we give for those kids who don't do so well on the ACT and the ASVAB, I mean, and with test prep and all of that, which we're trying to incorporate a lot more of too, I just think the number should just continue to skyrocket.
Dr. Leck?
I was going to add, in the years we've seen low turnout for ASVAB. That can be a limiting factor. If our students aren't taking the ASVAB or choosing not to take the ASVAB, that has kicked. Obviously, you can't be military ready if you don't take the ASVAB. And sometimes students don't always connect, why is this important to me to take this assessment? If they don't take it, they're automatically not military ready, so they would only have post-secondary and workforce ready. So in my opinion, that's a pretty key element, that when our students choose not to take that assessment, then they may not be eligible.
Any other questions for Julie? All right. Well, thank you
Yes,
so much, and
thank you very much.
Thank you for
I
all the
look
work you do with our.
Forward to reporting that we got more students this year than last year.
Oh, awesome.
So,
Awesome.
thank
And thank you for your department also and all the work that you do with our
Yes.
students. It's much appreciated. And we also appreciate the funding that was set aside for this, for students to be able to qualify for the scholarship to attend a college or university in the state of North Dakota. So I think that's tremendous also. So thank you.
And another neat feature about it too is even for those kids who are choosing to leave the state right away, the money waits for them for 6 years. So you
Yes.
can defer it.
Yes.
So I tell kids, you know, even if you're leaving somewhere to get a bachelor's somewhere else and you want to come back for your master's or doctorate, the money waits. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for students in the state of North Dakota. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay,
Thank you again
thank
for
you.
your work. Okay. So we're at the number 3D, number 1. And I think looking at the time here, I think we'll probably move right into our budget hearing before we move on. And Dr. Leck has a portion that he would like to talk about. And then if we have anyone that would like to speak at the hearing, we'll do that. Following that, 3 to 5 minutes on the topic specifics. So, Dr. Leck.
Sure, thank you. I did include Board Memo 109, as I have every year, that outlines the requirements for the budget hearing and provides context to the levy request. So I will just get into that in terms of the budget approval process. The board, through the Finance Committee, has met 8 times to review and to build the budget. I've listed the dates there, and also approved a preliminary budget this summer. The requirement is to have a budget hearing prior to October 10th. The final budget will be set forward on October 7th for formal board action. The intent of this hearing, though, is to receive any perspective or feedback that's necessary. So the hearing requirements are specified in North Dakota Century Code 57-15-02.2. And essentially what it states is that patrons must be allowed the opportunity to speak on the levy request. And the hearing is designed to be able to provide perspective to the board. It isn't a question and answer session, although board members may feel the need to clarify statements as appropriate. It is typical, as Dr. Larson has stated, to provide a set amount of time to either a speaker or a representative group. By policy, that's 3 to 5 minutes. And I will provide some context prior to opening the meeting to the public. Each year, I talk about the current request, and I think it's important that we provide some historical context. I have provided the levy request this year. Since 2013-14, the only shift in levy request has been in special assessments. It's ranged from 1 mil to 3 mils, but outside of that, it has been right around that 102 mils consistently. So if you look, I added the property type, a residence at $100,000, commercial at $100,000, and then cropland per acre at 1,012, and that is the average. So, and I've shown the previous tax impact. We are asking again for 102 mils. It has not shifted. So what that means is that the levy from that year, from last year to this year, has the same impact. If a $100,000 home was $459 last year, the school portion of that would be $459 again this next year. And each year I want to bring up again and again that we are not talking about reassessment of property. If property was reassessed, that taxable value will go up. So this is just an apples to apples comparison from one year to the next. If it is so desired, it seems like each year I revise the mill calculation worksheet a little bit, and I did that again this year. So if you want to look at the impact of different changes, whether it's mill levy changes or what happens if taxable value increases, you can look at that, or you can even put your own home or your own property into the tax calculator and do the same exercise, and you can see what the district will receive in terms of tax revenue, what your property would be assessed based on that worksheet. I think it helps sometimes to provide that context of what's being requested. Beyond that, moving into the chart on page 2, I've provided this every year too. I think, we look at taxation as a year-to-year comparison, and it is often valuable to look at a historical impact. One of the things that we'll talk about when we go into the superintendent's report, so I'm not going to double duty it here, but the historical precedence has been, we used to levy 185 mils in the state. So the local taxation was 185 mils, and then the state portion of our budget was much smaller. Over time, that shifted. It became a little more equalized, where schools traded levy authority to increase state funding. So then it became a little more equalized, 110, and then a slightly higher per pupil. Then it shifted again, and our levy authority now in the general fund is 70, and our per pupil payment is much higher. So, like I said, we often even make that comparison of what happens from year to year. What were my taxes last year? How much did my taxes increase? But we don't always look at the historical. So back when it was 185 mils, the last time that was 200. It was the 2008-2009 school year, and our total levy. And now, granted, we had a sinking in interest levy. We were still paying off the high school at that time, but it was 236.4 mils. Right now, we just talked. We're at 102 mils. So significantly different in terms of what our tax impact was. So on that $100,000 home, if you scroll back up, that's $459 last year, $459 this year. Back in 2008, 2009, on that home, that was $1,063.80. So that shift from local taxation to greater state funding has created a fairly large shift. So, taxes compared to 2008, 2009 are quite a bit lower. So we went down to 110 mils in 2009-10. That meant our total mill levy was 161.40 or 0.4. The impact was 726. 30 on that same $100,000 home. And then I've also included the last couple of years just to show that we're maintaining at 102 mills. Like I said, the variation for that has been the special assessment. As specials are higher or lower, there's a little bit of variance between those, but they've ranged between 1 to 3 mills in special assessment. So that's where you see any level of variability between the 13-14 school year and the 24-25 school year. I've also provided a little bit of information if you want to take that link to North Dakota organizes what they call finance facts. If you really want to nerd out and get into spreadsheets and taxation, you can go all the way back to 1984 and do comparisons between every school district in the state of North Dakota and the different levels of taxation. And you don't have to do that, but I do that every year, and I look at trends. And so some of the trends that you see are that the state average in the general fund is increasing across the state. And they are, and what that ties to almost always is a less of a commitment at the state level than what's necessary to provide an adequate education. So the districts, the local control of school districts picks up that difference. So you're seeing more and more schools have to increase that because the state funding hasn't been able to keep up yet. So of the districts that levied last year, 27 levied below 60 mills in the general fund, which is down from 16.5% last year. Really what that means is not every school can levy 60 mills. There are triggers in place that don't allow that to occur. I have a lot of opinions about that, and I know that at some point it will be to 60, but I consider 60 mills to be a state levy because that is deducted from our foundation aid payment as a way to equalize funding between schools. And so when you think about that, 60 mills of our 102 mills that we're requesting, 60 of those mills are essentially mandated by the state. So I think that's another important piece that we consider as well. But overall, more and more schools are just increasing that local levy, and the rationale, the reason for that is state funding hasn't quite kept up to the same level. And I know that the board is aware of this, but I want to talk about it still. The funding formula, when you look at state funding and local funding in North Dakota are almost have to be considered together. When we look at what our state funding is, it's based on two predominant factors: adequacy in education and equity in education. So adequacy in terms of state funding is what is the amount that is needed to provide a high quality education no matter the student's needs, no matter where they live, no matter what the situation they come from. What is that level of adequacy that is needed to provide high quality education? I like to look at adequacy as the state per pupil payment. And the reason I do that is because when you look at that per pupil amount, that's inclusive of state and local revenue. That's inclusive of that 60 mills and the state's commitment. They have to be considered together because we have our fair share of that adequacy. So what the state does is they deduct what's affordable for us, what's our portion, that gets deducted from that per pupil payment, and the state picks up the rest. So when we look at a per pupil amount that's $11,072, it's common sense for people to say, well, we get $11,072 per kid from the state, and that's not accurate. $11,072 is what's needed to provide a high quality education. That is adequacy, okay? Adequacy is about kids, and what do kids need? Equity is how can every school be treated on as equal playing field as possible. So some schools come from property poor. Some districts are property rich. And every kid, no matter where they live, deserves that adequacy. And so the state picks up the difference. So, like I said, we have to think about that adequate education as a shared cost between the local taxpayer and the state. And that's going to be different everywhere. So I provided a couple of examples in the handout that you can click on. But what I like to do is what's represented in the chart on page 3, and that breaks down. So if 11,072, which is the per pupil payment, is what is adequate for every kid, it's helpful for me to think about what those deductions are. What is the local taxpayer's portion of that 1172? So that, remember I said 60 of our mills are deducted. This is, they get deducted in the state assumed local contribution. So that 60 mills is deducted. So if you did that, if you deducted the value of that 60 mills to our per pupil, in Jamestown, that's $2,228 of that 1172 is deducted as the local contribution. We also get in lieu of revenue for Jamestown, that's $111 that's deducted from that 1172. That in Jamestown means that our state payment is not 1172, it is $8,733 because that's what we receive per pupil from the state. Okay, we don't get 1172, we get 8733. And if you want to click on that link, it's different everywhere because every school district's different. And I did a few different ones. I did Bismarck, their per pupil is actually 8629, Kidder County 7403, Medina 8666. So if you did that same exercise for these different districts, and you could do it for all 172 districts, and they would all be slightly different. But that is what our local contribution becomes. The other, I think, interesting part of that whole conversation also comes down to the Common Schools Trust Fund. You'll hear every legislative session we talk about, or somebody brings up, well, we should be targeting the Common Schools Trust Fund to do something to support education, whether it is universal meals, whether it's school construction, whether it's driving down the cost of something. Well, it already does. The Common Schools Trust Fund goes to pay for a part of that 1172, or at least the part of the state's portion of that 1172. This year, it counts for 2160 of that state's portion. So the state's portion was 8733. You can actually reduce that by another 2160 because the Common Schools Trust Fund is a constitutional fund. It was part of the Enabling Act. So when North Dakota became a state, it was required to set aside certain land for schools. And so that's a constitutional fund, so the state's mandated to provide that money. So really for us, the state's portion of that could even be considered 6573, not 1172. The equity strategies are necessary because, like I said, not all school districts are the same. And we want to make sure that every student, no matter where they live, has access and the ability to get a high quality education no matter where they live. I provided some other resources if the board or public is interested. I have a presentation that I've included that you can look through that walks through the state funding formula in much, much greater detail. I have included the September 24 payment worksheet that would correspond with that presentation. But two things that I can tell you about, two real realities that you will find in school funding. Schools are much more reliant on state funding because we have decreased local levy authority, which means less control, because our ability to mitigate is lessened. It's lessened than it was in 2008. We had more mills to be able to levy. So that's certainly happened. And any changes in enrollment have significant impacts financially because everything in 15 years ago, school wealth, financial health was determined based on property, and that is not the case any longer. Now it is in enrollment. So when you see a spike in enrollment or a sharp decrease in enrollment, there is significant impact from a financial standpoint. I'm not going to go through the definitions and explanations, although you may find it helpful if you walk through that presentation. But I did put together, as I do every year, some budget impacts and then future considerations to this budget. More than anything, over the next, in the short term and the long term, you're going to see two factors that are impacting fairly significantly. One is declining enrollment, and another is aging facilities that the board and the community needs to spend an adequate amount of time learning about so we can act appropriately. The Finance Committee met the final budget that is linked here that will be presented to the board for final approval on October 7th. represents a deficit of about 1.1, almost 1.2 million. So a revenue of almost 34 million and expenditures of a little over 35 million. Again, that deficit of about 1.1, almost 1.2 million. I will point out, as the Finance Committee did as well, that there is, if you look at unfilled positions, you'll find that we're actually projecting to be on budget. And so you might ask, well, how would that be if you're projecting almost a $1.2 million deficit? Well, we don't anticipate the ability to be able to hire all of the positions that we have. And I will say that we have, over the last, on the direction of the Finance Committee, over the last year, have looked at all of the positions. We know personnel is the largest part of our budget, personnel, salaries, and benefits. That represents 70% of our budget, and it does to any organization. We have already right-sized. We feel like that represents the best case, how we need to staff our buildings, from teachers to custodians. But we also know that we aren't going to be able to fill all of those positions. So what you see represented it with that zero, with that balanced budget, is actually where we anticipate being on June 30th. But if we could find all of those positions and hire all of those positions, we would be at about a $1.2 million deficit. So my point to bring that up is what we have currently is going to work, but it is not a sustainable plan. We have to continue to work and look at all of the variables that go into our budget, because a $1.2 million deficit is not sustainable. We know that we need to fill positions, and that is the place where we are right now, but it can't be the place that we need operationally to move forward with. Projected 28% decrease in enrollment. If we know enrollment is the #1 indicator of financial health in a school district now in North Dakota, a 28% decrease from 2003-2004 school year to a 10-year look forward in 2034. That's not a sustainable plan to operate as we have operated. There are changes over the next 10 years. One of the reasons we did long-term forecasting is to look at those exact scenarios. And so we know that there's more that needs to be done looking over the next 10 years. It's also shown us trigger points. So we see trigger points in 25-26 at the elementary in enrollment, 28-29 in the middle school, and 30-31 and 30-32 at the high school. So that means that operational changes at those trigger points are going to be necessary for us to, to continue to move forward and present a budget that represents our needs, but is also respectful of our local taxpayer and an efficient budget. So beyond that, and connected to enrollment and pending operational change is the need to address facilities across the district. We know that on an annualized basis, we have about $3.2 million in facility available and preventative maintenance needs, or at least they're primarily there. But we also know that over that 10-year span, we can raise about $1 million through the building fund. So there's a fairly significant gap, over $2 million of needs over the next 10 years. So something needs to occur, or we're eventually, I hate to use the, kick the can down the road, but right now we are prioritizing every year based on what we can afford. And eventually, that's not going to be an effective strategy. We need a strategy beyond just prioritizing every year the best that we can, because eventually we're going to reach a point where we can't. And so we need to have a long-term plan that lessens that gap of $2.1 million so we can reasonably prioritize every year. And the district did, through grants and federal dollars, what I call generational dollars through ESSER, we were able to provide $8 million towards those facility needs, and they're still at $3.2 million on an annualized basis. So there's more to do. As creative as the district has been in prioritizing those federal dollars, it still hasn't been enough. It's clipped the peak, but it hasn't solved the problem, and so we need more to do there. There's still uncertain impact related to Measure 4, which I'll talk about in my superintendent's report more. But I actually think that schools are a pretty interesting test case. If I were a city, if I were in city government, if I was in county government or on the the rural fire, Parks and Rec, I would be looking at the school and what's happened with the school as levy authority has decreased, because we provide a pretty interesting test case of what may happen or the challenges that those political subs are going to see, because it's going to be similar. So, but regardless, the uncertainty of what may happen with Measure 4 is something that the board and the community are going to need to monitor and determine what that impact would be. I think it's especially true as it relates to facility planning. There's a lot of uncertainty what happens with facilities if Measure 4 were to be approved. And we have been very, very lucky in writing grants over the last decade or so that have really helped us to move our district forward. But those are also not sustainable plans. Those grants have to be made available. They have to be made available, and we have to earn them. We have to be successful in a competitive grant. We've been able to manage that, and we've done pretty well. But that's not a long-term plan. That's a hope. And so we have to look at what the impacts of those grants are, but also once those dollars run out, what is the next step? How are we prioritizing what those needs are? Because just continuing on the same without making any other change is not an option either. So we have to look at the impacts of those grants. But you know, maybe the last most obvious piece of that is, of course, we are not immune in the school district to inflation. The inflation that's hit everybody has hit the school too. And you see that across operations. So, you know, we continue to see that, and hopefully that will start to stabilize even more and decrease, but that's still a challenge for us as well. But with that, before we open the hearing, I would be happy to answer any questions if there are any from the board related to my foundational talk anyway.
Any questions from the board? Jason?
More of a comment. I appreciate how you break down the foundation aid per pupil versus what we actually see. If anyone would do a random Google search or whatever, it'd be easy to find that $11,000 number, when in reality, we're $8,000 of that. So I appreciate you breaking that down, because I think that's crucial for the public to understand that's, because I've heard that number thrown around in the community, and that's not realistic of what we're able to use for our kids.
Yeah, well, thank you. And like I keep coming back to explaining that is not what the school gets. That is what the state has decided is the amount per pupil to provide an adequate education, minus our fair share. Right. So minus what the school provides or the local taxpayer provides in any community.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Any other questions? Aaron?
Yeah, just a comment, and it was actually a pretty engaging process behind the scenes. There's a lot of work done with the finance committee, and that people don't normally get to see unless you open the meeting minutes from the committee meetings in the agenda. So, but there was a lot of engaging discussion, and like Lek had stated, how do we show or what do we do about these open positions? And there were some challenging questions and some good discussion around that, and just what we need to do going forward. And to his point, that it's not sustainable, and we need to fix it. So, just on a long-term basis. But for this year, I think it's a pretty accurate assessment of where we're at.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay. At this time, we'll open the mic up for public communication. If anyone would like to come forward, 3 to 5 minutes on the topic specific, please come forward now. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Leck, for your presentation. So, there being no public communication, we'll close the budget hearing and we will resume our regular meeting. Under Strategic Plan Progress Monitoring, number 3E, If you remember, last time we went through two parts of this, and so in the interest of time of the budget hearing tonight, we can move on past that. And moving on next to the superintendent's report, Dr. Luck.
Thank you. I have my written report to you. The Facilities Committee met last week, or on September 5th, met with ICON, the architects that were hired. We had a lot of really good discussion that was mostly focused on past referendum, what was successful, what was not successful, how can we better engage the community in the decision-making process, vetting options that have been discussed, and ultimately what the Facilities Committee centered on is represented in Board Memo 110, and that is a process to engage the community by vetting the options that have been provided, similar to what happened with the Enrollment Facilities Task Force, but spending more time analyzing the factors and then the options that have already been identified by the board and getting additional feedback. And so the committee and the committee members can share other perspectives or additional context to this. But really what we wanted to provide was an avenue for a representative group to come forward. And what we targeted was an application process. So I was working earlier today on an application that we could send out to the public that says, if you are interested, put your name in, and ultimately we're going to have to pick a number, right? We can't have 300 people sitting in a room, but we're going to have a representative group that goes in and analyzes the factors. The board memo outlines what the purposes of each of these meetings would be, the timeline. And I won't get into all of those, but the recommendation from the Facilities Committee and from me is to approve, is for the board to take action to establish a community committee that would vet the options, provide context that is representative, and is based on an application procedure. So that's the recommendation moving forward. Another item that we talked about was if we do have a situation in which we have fewer elementary buildings, that we really need to conduct a boundary study. And the board also may want to conduct an enrollment study. The enrollment projections that I provided to you are cohort-based. So taking what we have now and moving along from year to year and doing an average of new groups. So that's a cohort projection. It's not a demographic calculation. And so we may want to, when we're doing a boundary study, demographers will often do an enrollment study at the same time. And so I'm meeting this week with the demographer, and I'll get a quote for some costs, and I'll provide the board with a little bit of information related to what those studies would be and what those costs would be for the board to consider, and a recommendation when I receive those from the demographer. We have an agreement for the Village Family Services. I talked about this in the past. The grant, the behavioral health grant, continues to pay that full amount. The cost hasn't increased over the last few years. It remains to be $65,000. The mill levy calculator has been provided. About 7 years ago, Jason Rohr was actually really instrumental in bringing forward what we called the Food Service and Counselors Donation Fund, and that was designed as a way for the communities to support families in need, for specifically related to their hot lunch accounts. And over time, as the fund has evolved and grown, the needs of students have evolved, and it's now to the point where I think we need to be really clear, and the fund purpose has also grown a little bit. We use that fund on a very, very small scale, but to help to support our food pantries. So those that don't know, we have a food pantry at the middle school. We have a food pantry at the high school, which are students that's mostly funded by the Great Plains Food Alliance. Community members can stop in and get food at any of those locations too. Our students can. While most of that food is provided at no cost, every once in a while there's minor costs associated. We look at priority items, things like peanut butter, sometimes hamburger, things like that do have a cost. They aren't free. And so a few $100s at most is sometimes used by that account to support the food pantries, to make sure that we have the types of products that our students and our families need. But also then, looking at those long-term balances and extenuating circumstances that our students and families go through. And I think it's time, and I think we've matured to a place now, evolved to a place where I would like to rebrand that as our Angel Fund and have very clear purpose for each of those, for that fund. But beyond that, then annual reporting that would happen in June of every month to the board that tells our community, well, yeah, you've donated to this fund. Here's how much we had at the beginning of the year. Here's how much we have now. And here's the buckets in which those dollars have been spent to provide transparency and accountability to those donations. So I provided those guidelines for your awareness. The last thing that I have, and I'll try to be brief, is measure, well, I probably won't be, but measure 4, I'm being honest, I'm a very transparent guy. But measure 4, we have a five meeting series on measure 4. I provided a written report to that. The purpose of this one is looking at the role of property tax and school funding. Before I do that, though, I also opened this up to staff, the board, patrons. If you have questions about Measure 4, I would try to do my very best to answer those questions, because this topic is complicated, and I want to make sure that we have, a lot of facts coming and less personal interpretation and misinformation. So I wanted to provide a place where people could get answers. And I'm just going to read those questions and kind of give you an overall response, although a written response is a little bit more detailed. One of the questions I received, these all came from staff. If funding is based on maintaining 2024 funding levels, what happens if a district has a sharp increase or decrease in enrollment? So everything is based on the floor of 2024. So that's what you would get from year to year. There would not be dollars associated with the increase, at least not as I understand Measure 4, of, if we suddenly spiked 100 students, unless the legislature were to create that mechanism, there wouldn't be, but we would be guaranteed that floor of 2024 levels. So it's a little bit of ambiguity there. But the legislature every session would be able to increase those funding levels, I suppose, if they wanted to, but the measure says guaranteed at that 2024 level. So that could be an increase every year, that could be stable, it could be go up and then go down to 2024 levels. I don't know the answer to that, but the 2024 floor would be unchanged from the standpoint of what is the minimum amount that school districts would receive. The 5th session in the series might delve into that question a little bit more directly. But like I said earlier, I think if I was a political sub outside of a school, I would be looking at school funding and the trends that are seen in school funding, because that would give me a pretty good sense of what I could expect as a political sub. Question was, you stated in a board meeting, it must have been at the last meeting, that Measure 4 provides a disadvantage to schools that have levied more responsibly and incentivized those that tax the most. Can you please explain that better? What I meant by that is everything is based on 2024. So everything depends on what a district or a political sub does this year. If you provided a tax decrease for whatever reason, whatever efficiency reason, that's the funding level that you're going to be guaranteed. If you asked for more, that's the level that you would receive. So you're actually, I would stand by that and say that you are incentivized to levy the highest possible levy you can in this year. And that is not at all what I'm suggesting to do. I'm simply saying that the way the measure is written, you would be incentivized to do that. And providing a tax decrease would be a disincentive, because that would be the level in which you'd be guaranteed funding moving forward. And so I do think that there are political subs out there that have been very, very, very responsible and have operated at the lowest possible level in the interest of doing what is best for the taxpayer and their organization. And they will be disincentivized because they will be at a lower level. Those that have operated potentially the least efficiently would be incentivized. I would stand by that. Last question, how do proponents of Measure 4 plan to replace property taxes? That comes up in the fourth in this series to answer that. But I think the intent is to either utilize the legacy fund, other state funds, or create some new mechanism. But that would not be the responsibility of the voter on Measure 4. That's the responsibility of the legislature. If that measure were to pass, then the legislature would be responsible for determining what that mechanism would be, not the voter. The measure itself is ambiguous and just say somebody else is going to do this. So as it relates to the role of property taxes, I'm going to bring this one back up. And if you have this presentation, some of this shows the shift. And I talked about the shift at the budget hearing, so I'm not going to talk about that again, other than to say in 2008, 2009, total levy was 236 mills, and now it's 102. The school portion on a residence was 1,063, and now it's 459 on that same value home. Apples to apples comparison, not about reassessment. So the second chart on page 1 shows you how much, and I said that shifted from the local to the state. The second chart is designed to show you how much. So in 2008, 2009, when we received 236 mills from the local taxpayer, our state funding was about 9.8 million. That's what we received, because that balance mostly came from local taxpayers. So in 9-10, when that decreased to 161 mills, so taxes went down by about $400 annually on that $100,000 home, the state started picking up more, so that 9.8 million became 15.7 million, so the state picking up more. In 2013, 2014, when we went down to where we are now at about 102 mills, so that 459, the state picked up even more. So the foundation aid amount moved from 2008-9 to 3325. It moved up to 8810. So that's where that shift happened. So the state was picking up more. The districts were picking up less. But there's a pretty significant shift of almost double, or about a little bit less than double. So that brings to the next point where, like I said, if I was a city manager or on the county commission, I would be very, very interested in what happens at the school, or what has happened historically at the school. Property taxes, the primary role that property taxes have in schools is they provide a stable, consistent stream of revenue. And as we've lost that ability, or as that has shifted to more state control, you will see, and I will show you, how that variability has come into play. Political and economic factors have been significantly impactful as we have lost that local control. And as the state has taken on more, they have more say. And so that means that those economic conditions and political conditions have shifted, and that property taxes provide the most stable and the most predictable source of revenue for political subs. The other thing that I think is important to recognize, and is one of the things that is valuable in understanding, to Jason's point earlier, that 1172 isn't what we get. We get a reduced amount from that because those deductions exist. There's been a few years, a few sessions in which the district has received no increase in funding. And when you believe the state provides that full 1172, common sense would tell you, well, if you get 1172 and you're held harmless, you don't see that 1172 increase, common sense will tell you you were held harmless. You received the same thing that you received last year, as long as your enrollment was the same. And that's not true, because those adjustments and deductions that I showed you in that breakdown of the 1172 to 8800, those continue to increase. So during that time, the state's commitment went down. And you'll see that happened first in 16-17 through 18-19. So with very little change in enrollment, you saw state funding go from 20 million to 19.2 million. So even though enrollment stayed about the same, the commitment from the state decreased about $800,000 in Jamestown. That was our impact. So it was fairly significant. And again, if I'm a city manager, if I'm on the county commission, that's very interesting to me. The impact for that reason, if you remember that time period, there was a lot of fluctuation. Economics in North Dakota were challenged. There was a depressed energy market, and that had huge implications in the legislature that year. So we saw stable funding. Stable funding means stable to the per pupil, not stable. We saw a decrease. Our amount went down. Only a handful of schools, and only those that saw increased enrollment or significant increase in enrollment saw increases. Most had the same path, less than what you had. This happened again in 2021 through 22-23, and that's at a much lesser degree, but we saw a decrease of about $300,000. So in those two spans of time, you're talking about $1.1 million between that 6-year span that we saw decreases for between 16-17 and 22-23. When I say that property taxes are the most stable, this is what I'm referencing, that there's ebbs and flows based on economic and political conditions that school districts would no longer have a chance to mitigate at all. We had less of an opportunity to mitigate when we moved from 185 to 110 down to 70. That would be completely eliminated. That ability to mitigate loss, we would simply be given what we are from the state, and that is what you have to operate with. And so there are outcomes from that I think are important to understand. If all you are given is what the state provides you, there will be operational changes that you will have to make. That is a certainty that will have to come. So if you get 2% of an increase from one biennium to the next, when you go through negotiations, when you go through operational changes, when you go through budgeting, that is what you will have. You don't have that plus what happens at the local level. That is what you will have. So there are trends that need to be considered there as well. I provided the same information on finance facts. And as it relates to my last point, that's where you see the impact of local taxation on local control. When you no longer have a say in the amount of funding, you don't have a say in what your operational budget looks like anymore, or you won't have as much of a say. You will solely be relying on what happens at the state level. It will become absolute. So we are going to have years like 2016 through 2019 and 2020 through 2023 where state funding doesn't match inflation. And that was to my point earlier, where you're going to have to make challenging decisions that you're not going to be able to mitigate. They're going to be provided for you. And you do have that, by definition, is a loss of local control. And I think that becomes even more problematic when you think about referendums for facilities. Measure 4, as I outlined in the first of these, doesn't allow for a referendum after January 1st, 2025. So there is a great deal of uncertainty how any school districts would address facility needs moving forward. You would not have that opportunity to seek out general obligation bonds any longer. So how the state would determine how that looks like, I don't know. That's a level of uncertainty. There isn't a defined plan for that. There is only what Measure 4 states, which is the legislature will figure that out. So with that, I would stand for questions on Measure 4 and my report.
Any questions from the board? Jason? Yeah. Yep, on the report.
Circling back quickly to the facilities meeting, as we face some of these facilities challenges coming our way, a big discussion, part of the discussion, like Dr. Leck mentioned, was past attempts at referendum. And I want to highlight again this application process to be on this committee because we want to hear the challenging sides of this. We want it's set up to be like a vetting process and smell all the sniff tests before we do present it to the community. So that's a strategic point that I think the group felt was missed last time, was just making sure that we have everybody, even the naysayers, involved in that group so that we can best prepare ourselves. So once that application gets out, I would encourage anyone to fill it out.
Thank you, Jason. Dr. Leck, did you have a comment?
Thank you. I agree with that completely. I just wanted to add one point to the spotlight that I missed. The high school boys soccer program partnered with the Freedom Resource Center to bring awareness to ALS, formerly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. So along with providing additional awareness, they also raised $671 for the Freedom Resource Center. So I think these are great activities in which we bring spotlights to the great work that our kids, our programs, our teachers and coaches and advisors do. So I appreciate our boys soccer program, the coaches and the Booster Club. I wanted to bring additional awareness to the work that they've done.
Any other questions or comments regarding the superintendent's report this evening? Okay. We're getting a lot of information today. So we're moving on in our agenda. Nothing under old business, nothing under new business or activities. Number 2, buildings and grounds A. Establish a community committee. Is there a motion? Motion by Melissa? Second by Jason. We have a motion and a second to establish a community committee. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. And then we are working on an application process, and more information will be coming out for community. So be on the lookout for that. Number 3, nothing under curriculum assessment instruction. Number 4, finance A. Approval of renewal of certificate of deposit. Is there a motion? A motion by Dan. Is there a second? Second by Steve. We have a motion and a second for approval of renewal of certificate of deposit. Dr. Leck?
I just have one comment. This was vetted through the Finance Committee as well, and the recommendation is to move forward.
Any questions from the board? Any questions for Christy from the board? Okay. Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. B, general fund for your information. Review of monthly financial reports for your information. We've had our public hearing. Any questions for Christy on those items? Okay. E, approval of the 2024 to 2025 budget revisions. Is there a motion? Motion by Jamie. Is there a second? Second by Aaron. We have a motion and a second for approval of the 2024 to 2025 budget revisions. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Under operations, approval of memorandum of understanding with the Village Family Services to provide K-12 mental health therapy. Is there a motion? Motion by Melissa. Is there a second? Second by Jason. We have a motion and a second for under operations A, approval of memorandum of understanding with the Village Family Services to provide K-12 mental health therapy. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Nothing under personnel, nothing under policy and procedures. 8, tuition. A, approval of tuition agreement for number 1 Montpelier. Is there a motion? Motion by Melissa. Is there a second? Second by Aaron. We have a motion and a second for approval of tuition agreement for Montpelier. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Number 9, under other, the North Dakota School Boards Association Conference update. This is information, and Amy's not here, so any questions on that?
Just to make us aware if you are planning to attend as soon as possible so we can register. Just a reminder, they don't do refunds, so if you sign up,
Yep.
Be sure that you can go.
Yep, and let Amy know. Yes, Jamie?
Do you have to do both days? Can you just sign up for one day or?
Well, it depends on most of the School Board Association conferences, they have pre-sessions and sessions. I don't remember this one, if they have pre-sessions, but if you're signing up, you register in as much of the day as, if you can go to one day, then you go to one day, but there isn't a different cost structure.
And I can have Amy get a hold of you also to answer the details. Any other questions or discussion? Okay. If not, that was for your information. Items for future agenda. Does the board have any items for future agenda? Any items? If you think of something later, just let Dr. Leck or myself know. Under meetings to be scheduled, we have a school board regular meeting on Monday, October 7th, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. in the Thompson Community Room. The North Dakota School Boards Association Conference is the October 26th and 27th, and check your calendars for that, like we said, and yes. They're not correct. I'm reading off my agenda, so.
25th, I think.
24th and 25th. Okay, let's make a note of that. Okay. So check your calendars for those dates, and then let Amy know, and she'll help you get what we need, the information we need for that. There's also a communications meeting at 4 p.m. in the conference room tomorrow. Communications Committee, there you go. And we have a monthly superintendent evaluation for tonight is Section 3, Human Resource Management, and Section 5, Community Relations, so please complete that. There being no further business before the board, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.